We're really talking about today is, what are some of these core elements of agility? How are they manifesting in our work as coaches or agile practitioners? And what are some of the breakdowns that are happening when we look at these elements and how they're actually working in our work that we're doing? So the place that we're going to start really is uh, the core elements of agility. So I'm going to actually share my screen. We have a brief slide deck here.
If you don't already know this trick about Zoom, you can now take there's a little two line thing right between the slides and the pictures. You can slide that all the way over. So you get big people and small slides. So you might want to do that now.
So we're going to start with the basics, the values, principles, and practices. So we see these show up in many different ways. It starts really with the Agile Manifesto, lays out pretty clearly the values and principles of this big umbrella that we call Agile. And you can see these different things show up in all of the different frameworks. So Scrum has their own values, Kanban has their own values. And with Scrum, Kanban, Safe, we really start to see the practices emerge. So how do we do the things that we do in organizations? So, in Scrum, we see things like sprints, the different events, the very concrete nuts and bolts things that we do as Agile practitioners. And all three of these are necessary for us to be successful with this. We can't sort of pick and choose of, well, I'm only going to do the practices, or I'm only going to live into the principles and forget the practices and values. We're really pulling from all three of these all the time in a very integrated way so that these frameworks actually work and we get product out the door and we get teams that work well together.
At least that's the theory. But what we see happening in real life is a little bit removed from that.
Yeah, so we hear this other conversation in the Agile community around being versus doing Agile. And these are talked about sort of as an either or. So we see organizations that are very preoccupied with the doing of Agile. So the term sort of installing Scrum. Organizations look out into the marketplace, they see other organizations doing Scrum, making more money, getting things out the door faster possibly. And they say, well, we want to be that. That looks good to us. So come here and have us work in sprints. We want to do iterations. We want to have retrospectives. They take on all of the practices and they do those. And we see on the flip side, the coaches and the organizations that really focus in on the values of the being of Agile. And oftentimes that creates its own set of problems.
Right. And I think one of the challenges that we see is this dichotomy and sometimes a bit of a war between, we have to do Agile, no, we have to be Agile, and really setting those up as a polarity, which, a polarity for us human beings is one of the most challenging places to be. We're sort of forced to choose an either or. And it really sets up a challenge in our industry. We see this all the time. You just need to be Agile. No, we need to do Agile. And we get lost in that dichotomy.
Yeah, a lot of the times as coaches and even organizations, certainly our clients, get stuck in the middle. So we end up in this place where we're not stepping fully into either one. We're either ping-ponging rapidly between both, or we're able to embrace one fully. Like, let's say we're really into the being of Agile. I understand the values and I embody them and want to model them. Yet our organization isn't doing the practices of Agile. So we're not fully in it all the way. So it's this space in the middle that Kat and I are really interested in and focused on, of this sort of no man's land in between being and doing that seems to be appearing in a lot of organizations, and even in a lot of the junior coaches. I'm sure some of you have worked with Scrum Masters who are just entering the world of Agile. And in your coaching, you've probably seen what Kat and I have seen, which is they are even starting to gravitate to one of these poles. So you'll have some Scrum Masters come in who are really into the idea of being Agile and they want to be all in on it, yet they're not taking the time to study and learn the frameworks that are necessary to do Agile. So
Right. I think
yeah.
obviously one of the biggest challenges with being told to be Agile is it's really hard to know how to do that. What does that mean? How do I make that a reality? How do I be Agile? And it creates this, I think it's one of the contributors to organizations sort of throwing up their hands and saying, well, I don't know what to do here. I don't know how we get there.
Right. And then on the flip side, you've probably worked with coaches who maybe came from the project management world and they're very into the process and the practices. So they've studied up, they've taken their CSM class, they have memorized the events, and they hold them regularly. They do a stand up every single day, but it's just sort of a micro meeting where they're having people report out their statuses. So the reasoning behind all these things hasn't changed. We're just doing sort of a new flavor of waterfall or some sort of conventional methodology, but we've sort of contorted it into a new shape. We've only
Or,
taken on practices, but nothing underlying. No principles and values have changed about why we're doing the things we're doing.
or they're, I've also seen it where they are, doing a good job at affecting the meetings and going
Mhm.
through the motions and maybe doing that well even, but without progressing any further than that, without actually being able to finally get their hands around the benefits that Agile promise, right? The reason they probably wanted to do it in the first place, they're not getting there because they are really just going through the motions of the ceremonies, if it's Scrum or other activities, if it's another model. You can't actually get their hands to the benefits of it.
Yeah, and I think that actually happens on both sides of this equation. That's why this is so important. Is no matter which side you're on, if you're only emphasizing one of these, true agility is never going to take hold inside of an organization. You're always missing some piece. It's out of balance, and that's a lot of the reason we're seeing agile transformation sort of flag and fail. Is an overemphasis on one of these things without bringing in more than that, more
I
than
think
just one of these.
Yeah, and I think it's also one of the reasons that Agile coaches are getting burned out because it is an impossible agenda to carry forward if you're in one camp or the other. So it's actually much more than one or the other. And how do we then bring all these things together so that we're being useful to our clients and we're actually helping them to step truly into a new way of thinking about and doing their work and getting to the place they want to get to. Each of the thinking, being, and doing creates more possibility in the others, and that I think is what allows us to actually respond to complexity, which is actually the bottom line of everything that all of our organizations are in the middle of. This is a very complex space. How can we respond to complexity? It's not by the things that we've been doing all along. It's about paying attention to what's happening right now so that we can make the right choices as we move into what's emerging.
Yeah, I'm actually going to share my screen again and go through the next couple of slides as we continue our conversation here. So this was the slide we sort of ended on of showing this big dilemma and this gap in between doing and being. And as our conversation evolved, we sort of have moved on into we're starting to see the need. These have to be merged. We can't take them apart completely. So this dilemma that we see ourselves in is sort of an illusion. These things are always both happening at the same time. And as Kat was saying, there's more to it. So this has sort of come up. Nicole and Justin and Charles, you've pointed to this this other thing that exists, which is the thinking. Um, Nicole, you mentioned it sort of as bringing in those principles, helping people understand the why, and it does come down to the theories and the means and the methods of this is the stuff that we're doing that really bridges the gap between our being, that sort of embodied sense of agile and modeling, and the doing, the sort of nuts and bolts practices. And Charles, to comment on your question, I think it's really pertinent here where I think a lot of leadership and management teams, the jump between from doing to being is so big that this thinking is often that middle step. So I need you to understand the theories and means and methods. And if we can bring leadership along with that, they can start to piece together what first seemed like polar opposites to them. And it starts to become a more integrated whole of all of these things.
And I think that actually really is the challenge, right? So, Tim, you said this is an illusion that we have to do one or the other. And I think that that's something really important to pay attention to. I hear that in the hiring challenges you're having, Justin, right? And it really is tied into complexity because as human beings, we all want things to be simple, and they aren't. There are a few things that get to go into that sort of simple quadrant, but most of them, the work that we do, our organizations, and the things they're trying to accomplish, those fall into the complex space. And the move is often, unfortunately, to simplify everything down to a point where it's no longer useful. So being able to engage with somebody that's hiring us, or our managers, right? The leaders you're talking about, Charles, and helping them find the ways to navigate complexity, get rid of the illusion that has us want to make it simple, and frankly understand that illusion and the desire for it. That's part of our job, and helping them then move into accepting that it is not simple, that it is complex, and giving them the pathway to get there. And that requires really so much from you as an agile coach. It requires you to understand human nature and complexity, as well as how do we integrate thinking and being and doing in a way that we can respond to the challenges that our organization is facing right now.
Yeah, that's sort of the punchline for the deck and what we're talking about today. For Agile to really work, we need to emphasize and integrate all three of these things. They all have to be working in conjunction for us to start shifting organizations. And I think a lot of this polarity has come from um, how we all learn to be scrum masters and coaches.
Mm.
There's sort of a gap almost in, training reifies this idea that there's two different things. We often take a training. How many of you have taken a training where you learned a new framework, a process, a tool? So like a Scrum training or SAFe training or design thinking. Yeah, it's pretty common. That tends to be where our training is emphasized. It's the doing stuff, the practices is where we get education and we learn from teachers about. Um, how many of you have taken a class about being an individual and having interactions? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
not so much. I mean, they're harder to find, let's say that. They're few and far between, and it's not the bulk of the training that we see in the Agile industry.
right. So I often think about just that first line of the Agile Manifesto, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Yet our industry favors training in processes and tools so heavily that it makes it hard. It sets up sort of a cognitive dissonance, whether we're conscious of it or not. We're sort of emphasizing processes and tools and de-emphasizing any sort of training for individuals and interactions. Um, so it sort of brings us back to, okay, we're starting to get a clearer picture on, well, where did this dichotomy come from, this being doing split? Because typically we see, Kat and I like to talk about sort of the agile gurus, like the people who are sort of, wear flowing white robes and talk to you about, being agile and, the inner game and your feelings about agile and all of that stuff, without talking about any practices. And then more commonly, we see a lot of people talking about practices without talking about any inner values.
So this integration of thinking and being and doing is the foundation of the work that we do. It is the driving idea behind the curriculum that we offer for our Agile coaches.
Yeah, so this is really the idea that we're bringing in, which is there is a way to sort of develop these um, all together at the same time. It's almost just sort of different layers of the same process. We need all three of these to be working in conjunction, and we can intentionally develop all three. So there is a different way to learn and a different way to develop your coaching by building all three of these skills and strengths and parts of yourself at the same time.
Yeah, I
Uh,
really do think about this as a spiral, right? And in the fullest sense of that, each of these things contributes to the understanding and the knowledge and the essence of the next. And with each layer, we sort of expand outward, continuing to add more and more. There isn't an ending point, right? Our thinking impacts our doing, which impacts our being, which impacts our thinking. There is this ever growing impact on the next. And I think that actually that's a little bit of what makes it so hard for individuals and organizations to interact with what is really happening in agility, is that there isn't a thing to get to, that island where it all turns out. There is this ever evolving um, expression of agility and the ability to be right here, right now, to see what are the seeds of the answers for the problem that we're in, because it's not back there where we used to look. And we're as human beings, we're sort of programmed to look.
Yeah, so it's almost adopting an agile way to learn instead of a linear way to learn. So it's not about, well, I'm going to learn all the processes and then I'm going to learn about all the values and then learn all the principles. We need sort of this feedback loop, everything working off everything else. So it doesn't really matter where you start. So you might learn a principle or a theory about how to work. Then you need to practice it. Then you need to reflect on, well, how is that showing up in me? Is that in alignment with my personal values? Um, how do I want to manifest this in an organization? By the thinking, what are the theories? What are the means? What are the principles that I want to draw on? How will that show up? How does that change me? And it's a daily practice. It's every time we do something, we feel this shift happen.
Yeah. So let's talk about the structure of the Advanced Agile Coaching Program that we offer, Tim. So we do this over 6 months. Level 1 is 6 months, and we do it in sprints. And each of those sprints has a focus. And much as Tim is pointing to, there is sort of a building on over the course of the 6 months that sort of adds pieces into your agile coaching as you go with practice. I think that is actually one of the um, hallmarks of this training, is that we slow it down. I think that there is a tendency, certainly it's my experience, even in other courses that I've taught, that it's like all the stuff right now at one time. And that's not useful. It's great as a way to sort of start to see the breadth of the materials that are out there to learn. And it's not a way, not a useful way to actually start to incorporate and integrate those things into your life. So, this and into your coaching practice. So, that is a hallmark of this program, is we take a thing and we look at it and we practice it and we start to integrate it into more than, just right now. It's a longitudinal learning journey.
Yeah, I think that's one of the catches with shifts in our being, shifts in who we are, don't happen in 5-day boot camps. They don't happen in a one master class.
Mhm.
Um, the humans change at a different pace than we learn, perhaps. So thinking is often the quickest. I
Mhm.
think you can get exposed to a lot of new thoughts pretty quickly. But then we need these sort of slower moves of, one step slower is the doing. So I'm going to go and actually practice this in a meeting, a real meeting that I have coming up. So I've learned this new thing. Let me go practice it. And then let me reflect on it. One, by myself, how is this working for me? But also, this 6 month is set up in a cohort, which means you're with the same people for the whole time. And you're working in the whole group, but also in smaller groups. So you have the ability to reflect in a group. So, talking through it with someone, here's what I practiced, here's what happened, it went well, or maybe it didn't go so well. Here's what I'm learning from it. What are you experiencing? Since we're all, we set the 6 month up in 12 sprints. So every sprint has a focus area that you will learn about in a class, and then you will practice it in your real work. So this is one of the great benefits of remote learning like this. We don't have to fly to some place to be together, which makes a 6 month class almost impossible.
Mhm.
It's prohibitively expensive. This way, we can get knowledge from people all over the world who are experiencing similar things, but also different things than you, and working with them to learn from one another in your real work. So we want to blur this line between sort of classroom and work,
Mhm.
um, because we can quite easily in this format. You can learn something and then practice it for 2 weeks at your job with your teams, with your organization, and see how it's going for you and have a chance to sort of reflect on that and modify.
Yeah, one of the other things that I think is really, I want to say delightful, but also challenging about being in the same cohort for 6 months is that over, a relatively short amount of time, the suits of armor that we put on ourselves start to fall away and we can get through them, right? When you're just with somebody for a week, you can mostly keep them on and maybe you can't see through, but over 6 months, it gets harder and harder to do that. Your real self starts to show up in a different way. And there's so many great sort of inroads that I could use to talk just from that. There's the willingness to be more truthful and honest and forthright with each other. And there's also the opportunity for you to start to look more closely in yourself as well, because, oh, this is actually how I'm showing up. So what do I do with that? So I think there's our students right now, I think if I think about their feedback, there's a really useful inner exploration that we help to push, and I think that's sometimes challenging, and in our experience so far always appreciated, even when it's difficult. So there is that um, container, I think, that really promotes growth and development in a way that's most useful, and that I think is immediately applicable to the work you're doing every single day. And I think that that's what for us is really important, because our teaching isn't just about being, it can't be. It has to be, well, how do I do this? What do I actually do to make things different in my job right now? How can I help my team or my organization or the leaders that I'm working with actually um, be different, and through the doing and the thinking, show up in a different way, which I think elicits the people you're working with to show up in a different way.
Yeah, so a concrete example of that would be we focus a sprint on giving and receiving useful feedback. So there is this sort of concrete practice of it. Here are some structures you can use that make that conversation a little bit easier. Here's how to construct an effective opening statement so you can get into a hard conversation a little bit easier. But obviously, it also takes, the discomfort and recognizing how uncomfortable it is to give someone a hard piece of feedback. So it's an important, I would say, essential skill for us to have as coaches. And it's really challenging on every one of these levels. Doing it is hard because oftentimes we don't have a structure. Well, how do I navigate this conversation? What does it look like? What are the parts of it that should happen? We don't have a practice theory of, okay, how do I hold this in my head and understand the framework that I'm going to use for this conversation? And then the inner discomfort that comes with it, either the pain of giving someone a piece of news they don't want to hear and can't see in themselves, um, and the challenge that the mess that often creates that we're forced to clean up as a coach.
Mhm.
So I have to tell this person this thing is happening and it's disruptive to the team, and I know there's going to be fallout. How can I be with that feeling?
Mhm.
So even that's sort of a micro example, but we can see almost everything we do as a coach falls into all three of these pretty clearly. The way that we communicate, our ability to be in complexity, which we often are as agile coaches, the ability to define our agile coaching stance. What am I about as an agile coach? What do I want to bring to an organization? Things like helping people through change, which is really difficult, and they're going to struggle with, and their inner life is going to be disrupted a little bit.
Mhm.
So that's our focus, is really providing concrete skills that are essential for agile coaching, but also looking at this deeper picture to help you make the changes you want to make in your organization.
Yeah, those of you that have worked with us before are probably onto us about this, and that is that one of the underlying foundations of any work that we do is that any shift that we want to make out there, we have to start with ourselves. And so that is a focus. It's both of those things. How do I shift myself so that I can be more effective out there, and actually, make a difference? And I think that's often the thing that is in your way, is figuring out what in here needs to change so that I can be more effective out there. or the thing that I'm trying to do out there is making me so uncomfortable I can't get past it. And so I kind of let it go so often in my day to day, and I don't know what to do about that. We see that a lot. I see some of your heads nodding as well. So
Yeah. I
this
actually want to,
this is a thing that we are all in the middle of, us
yeah.
too. So
So let's actually pause here because I'm seeing that same sort of smiles and head nodding. So I want to throw it to the group and see what's coming up, what's happening for everybody as we talk about this stuff.
I was gonna say, Tim, when you said shifts, don't happen in 5-day boot camp, it just brought back our experience together, and to me, that was the significant prompt for shifting in myself.
yeah.
And received a comment from a close friend of mine that maybe this boot camp is very much what prompted the struggles you're going through right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So everything that you guys are saying, I mean, straight on point. A thought I'm having right now is you touched on the structure, the sprint cycles, trying to envision what our day-to-day interaction would look like.
Yeah.
That sprint interaction. How much time and commitment is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, good
While you're
question.
juggling your job,
Right.
which I'm
Yes.
still trying to find right now.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
just that's a good question. So just structurally, here's what
Yeah.
it really looks like is we have at the beginning of each sprint, there's a 3-hour meeting, which is a combination of conversation and sense making from the sprint before, new content in terms of thinking, some mini practices in that session, and then just dialogue around some of the challenges that you're experiencing. So that's the 3-hour chunk. You get a recording from that and a handout that sort of gives the pertinent points, and you get an assignment. So from each sprint, there are some practices, thinking, being, and doing practices that we offer you. Often it is, I would say almost always, it's things that you will be doing every day in your job anyway. So, but with a focus. So here's something we want you to try, or here's a way to reflect on some of the things that are happening. And then you meet with your pod once a sprint, more often if you want, but that's the request, is once a sprint, ideally for about 2 hours. And that is for you to create community, talk about the practices, how they're going, what are some of the challenges that other people are facing, and just generally engage with each other around the content of the sprint. Then at the end of the sprint, you will post your assignment, which often is just reflections. So
Yep.
our experience is with most people, this is about 1 to 2 pages. Sometimes it's a couple paragraphs of your experience. And then you will give everybody feedback on that. So in each and every sprint, you are starting to build your own capacity to give and receive feedback, which we think is one of the most important things. And while we do focus a sprint on it, it's also a practice that goes through the entire course because it's so important to learn how to do that well.
Yeah. So
Um,
what we're looking at really is it's sort of like 4 hours of new stuff. Like these are new events that appear in my life. The rest of it, we're very conscious about, practice happens at work. It's almost an invisible time. It's just two things happening at the same time.
and then in addition to that, you have 2 coaching sessions, one with Tim and one with me over the course of the 6 months. And I think that's it. Yeah, as much engagement as you want to engage with the cohort on the Slack channel. We have lots of nice conversations and stimulating conversations that happen there. Um, does that answer your question, Justin?
Yes, it does very much. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Tomer, you look like you were going to say something earlier. Have you got something to bring in here?
Already what? No, nothing.
Okay.
No.
Other questions or comments or curiosities that are out there?
I will say that I'm with Justin. Is that my experience when I took the boot camp with y'all a couple years ago now. I was very much in the doing camp going into it, and it was those 3 days. It was 3 days. was a nice little shove
That's right.
into the middle. And the one thing that I do remember, and you both hit it, is that it was 3 intense days, and a lot of it, there was a lot of really good shifts that happened. But just over time, life happens and work happens, and it's almost like a rain eroding away at a mountain. And it's like,
Yes.
I like the idea of the prolonged period of time to continuously reflect and make it more us.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you know, I told Scott when I first joined at where we're at, I was like, dude, you have to go to this. This is amazing. It's going to change the way you look at things.
Thank
I
you,
think
Charles.
training often does that. It sort of like rips a band-aid off and sort of exposes
Right.
something to us, but then it doesn't get integrated, or it's very hard to integrate it. At least that's my experience. Oftentimes I go to one of these 5-day trainings and I get so many new ideas to think about, and it's hard to actually figure out where they all go, because my being doesn't change that fast. I can't like leave 5 days and be like, awesome, I'm totally different and I'm ready to go do all of this stuff I learned.
Right. Well, and I want to say, I think that both are useful, right? I think that there
Mhm.
is usefulness in having a 1 day or a 5 day class where you are sort of introduced to all of these ideas. I think that's essential. I mean, I do learning like that. We offer learning like that. And those have a place in your learning catalog. And it's not enough. You know, it does take just, I know this for myself as well, tremendous discipline to now take these great ideas and start to integrate them into my life in a way that it has a lasting impact. I think that it's really challenging. I've failed many times at trying to do that well. So I like this container of slowly starting to actually create new habits. And again, even in that space, they're not all going to stick. I would say that if we look at our students in the current cohort, each one of them has taken the thing that is really impactful for them. And maybe it's a couple things over 6 months. They're not likely to take all of them. That's a really tall order. And it's not an expectation. It's not, I don't think it's really feasible. But I also think that there's no way to not have those things impact the others. So there is a way in which even the couple of things that you will take away as new ways of being and doing and thinking will be impacted by the others. It's that sort of blossoming of the fullness, I think, of the things that do resonate very strongly with you. That is a natural byproduct of this kind of learning.
Hi, Kat.
Hi.
How often do you start a new batch? Is it like a 3-month, 6-month start time?
How often do we start a new cohort?
Mm-hmm.
It's about we're going to be opening up registration for this one right after this call, and it starts March 3rd. And we probably will start another one in 4 or 5 months, something like that.
Yeah, we usually do about 3 cohorts a year is the plan.
Yeah.
I'll probably be the last one then. Not so much.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we start closing up to give you some time to make it to your next meeting?
Thank you all for joining us. It's been great to speak with you.
Yeah, so one question before we have people dropping off. We've recorded this. What we would like to do is just take the chunks where Kat and I are talking through the slides and about what we're doing and send it to everyone who signed up who couldn't make it. Is there anyone for whom that's a problem? Okay, great. Yeah, and as Kat said, registration for the next cohort is going to open up right after this call, so you'll be the first to know about it. You can visit our website, TBDAgile, Thinking, Being, Doing Agile, .com, and there's an application there.
If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. And if you want another conversation, we're always open to that as well. Thank you, everyone. It was great to see your faces, and hope you all have a great evening or rest of your day wherever in the world you are. And we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.